Pleasure to welcome you today to our webinar on local procurement checklist. Bonjour à tous et à toutes. Il me fait plaisir de vous accueillir aujourd'hui à notre webinaire sur la liste de vérification pour l'approvisionnement local. Before we get started, I do wish to acknowledge that the land on which I am present today has been the traditional land of the Anishinaabe Algonquin Nation. I welcome you to consider and reflect upon the lands where you are present today. Our webinar today is going to walk you through the local procurement checklist to support Indigenous procurement in mining, which is a collaborative initiative of the Canadian Minerals and Metals Plan that we developed in collaboration with Mining Shared Value and Makwate. Notre webinaire aujourd'hui vous guidera à travers la liste de vérification pour l'approvisionnement local afin de soutenir l'approvisionnement auprès d'entreprises autochtones dans l'industrie minière, qui est une initiative collaborative du Plan canadien pour les minéraux et les métaux et que nous avons développé en collaboration avec Mining Shared Value et Makwate. The Canadian Minerals and Metals Plan was launched in 2019 in collaboration with provincial and territorial governments, Indigenous peoples, industry, and other partners and stakeholders to improve the competitiveness of Canada's minerals and metals sector. Minerals continue to play a critical role in day-to-day life, and this includes supporting the energy transition and the shift to low-carbon technologies. Working with Indigenous peoples is essential for the future success of Canada's mining industry and can really help to pave the way towards economic reconciliation. It's become increasingly important to support Indigenous communities with tools to be able to ensure their full participation in the mining sector and also to help benefit from development on or near their traditional territories. This is why we set a target under the plan to create a local procurement checklist to help spur greater Indigenous procurement from both the industry and community perspectives. Solid partnerships are more important now than ever as we look to ramp up critical minerals production. Better understanding, listening, and engagement leads to more meaningful projects that can become those generational building blocks. Today, we have attendees coming from industry, from government, consulting, and of course, Indigenous nations. And I want to thank you all for your interest, as the work that you do is really instrumental in furthering economic reconciliation and for ensuring a vibrant and successful Canadian mining industry for years to come. We're joined today by Jeff Geipel and JP Gladu, two of our co-creators in the checklist, who are going to take the time today to walk us through how it can be used. JP is currently the principal of Makwate and has previously served as the president and CEO of the Canadian Council for Aboriginal Business, or CCAB. JP has over 30 years of experience in the natural resource sector and also sits on a number of boards, including Suncor and Borden Mining. Jeff is the founder and managing director for Mining Shared Value, program of Engineers Without Borders Canada. This nonprofit initiative works to help improve the development impacts of mineral extraction in host countries through increasing local procurement by the global mining industry, working with industry, governments, civil society, and other actors to create systemic change. So we'll end today's session with a Q&A period, and that will allow Jeff and both Jeff and JP to answer some questions that you might have. And just a reminder that this webinar is going to take place in English, but I do invite you to ask questions in the language of your choice. Le webinaire se déroulera en anglais, mais si vous avez des questions en français ou dans la langue, je vous invite à poser vos questions dans la langue de votre choix. Alors, JP, over to you.
Great. Thank you so much. And before I get started, I just wanted to share a quick personal story. I've been out in the land, which there's many mining explorations going on around my territory. I am calling in from my community, Sandpoint First Nation, and I've been hunting the last few days with my daughter, who's 20 years old, and she harvested her first moose just the other day. And my father, chief of my community, actually, we were butchering the meat last night. And the reason I tell you this story is that our connection to the land is still present, and we're passing down that knowledge, which I learned from my dad down to my daughter. And it's really a proud papa moment to know that my daughter's as good as with scissors as a hairdresser in Montreal as she is with a knife, field dressing a moose and the whole process. And I thought that would be a good way to start today's meeting. Jeff, it's so good to see you. Jeff and I go back, well, 8 or 9 years now during my time at CCAB, and I want to recognize Max Scooter, who's business partner here at Mokwete, but did a lot of the big lifting with Jeff over the years, including this report and around the global practices. And the way this came together was that Jeff's in EWB, Engineers Without Borders, they came to the table and they just had a conversation with Max and I, because we're pretty plugged in with Indigenous nations across the country, to get a sense of where did this global report reflect with regards to the Canadian experience. And we went around to our Indigenous nations, economic development corporations of the country, to get some of the leaders' opinions, and it measured up really well. But we wanted to ensure, and that everybody understands, and I'm sure you do, that we're not a monolith. Indigenous nations are different across the country. And so this is a guide in which Jeff, I know, is going to walk us through a presentation here. This is a guide for organizations to use, but you've got to spend the time understanding our nations. Every nation is different, their capacities, their experiences, their sophistication, their balance sheets, their businesses that are participating in your supply chains. So taking note of that is really important. So again, this is a guide, and I'm excited to see Jeff go through this. I know he's a pro at it. Just very high level again, when we think about the Indigenous procurement space, at the same time when we were at CCI, I guess it's now the Indigenous Business Council, Canadian Council for Indigenous Business, led by Tabitha and her team. They continue to do amazing work. We were also pushing for procurement at the federal level. And although there are both opportunities and challenges as a program evolves, as the commitment by not only government sectors, but the private sector to engage in this important space, understand that the relationships that get built, whether they're small businesses to the larger corporations that exist in our Indigenous nations, those relationships are fundamental to building out, regaining trust in our communities and our level of skills, education, experience that are going to contribute to the mining sector here in Canada. So this is incredibly important work, in our opinion, and we're excited to walk you through this guide. And I'm going to button up there, Jeff. Hand the baton over to, or I'll say, hand the skinning knife over to you, Jeff. And please carry on. I'm looking forward to the conversation and questions that will ensue. There you go.
Just need to unmute myself here. So there I go. And also good to see you, JP. You're looking a little bit tanned from your Australia. You were in Australia, if I recall. So you can see, you can tell that you were. Let me just start the slideshow here. Okay, my slides are moving forward. Great. Thank you so much. As was explained, I'm Jeff Eiffel. I started the Mining Shared Value Program of Engineers Without Borders Canada, and we've been working to promote local procurement by the mining and wider extractive industries now for over a decade, and really excited to work with NRCan and the CMMP on this checklist. It's important to note that we work sort of all over the world on this issue of local procurement and sort of finding systemic ways to increase that. But I think in Canada, we have so many good models to use that could be used elsewhere. I think it's often overlooked the fact that Canada has actually been a leader in many of the structures of local procurement across the industry. So again, excited to put that down on paper in the form of this checklist, and that we hope it helps both industry and Indigenous communities work together to increase local procurement. So again, the purpose of this checklist is to support mining and exploration companies implement effective strategies to increase local procurement from Indigenous-owned businesses. I should say that most of the practices would be quite applicable in a non-Indigenous setting, but certainly we wanted to make this very targeted at the Canadian Indigenous space, and that's why we were excited to work with JP and his team to crowd in feedback from different stakeholders in Canada and from the Indigenous community. And of course, the second overall objective of the checklist is to highlight that procurement of goods and services is a huge economic development opportunity. And obviously, JP through his experience with the CCIB or CCIB, and various partners can attest to the role that mining can play in economic and social development. We've seen some really exciting examples of really meaningful development from the sector. I was just actually up in Sudbury the other week for the OECD mining cities and regions event, and was able to visit the Winnipeg group nation nearby there, and that was a very exciting opportunity to see what they're doing. And they're building a film studio now. I mean, it's absolutely incredible what they're doing there. So again, we've seen transformation by supplying the natural resource sector in Canada. So the checklist is designed to be used by mining and exploration companies, but also, for that matter, engineering, procurement, and construction, and EPCM contractors. So certainly, we know that big contractors like the engineering firms that build mines do the bulk of the procurement during development of mines. So yes, this is really targeted at mining and exploration companies, but essentially any actor who's doing procurement during a mining project, can use this checklist to kind of steer their directions. And I think also it's worth noting that the exploration companies, may be doing smaller amounts of procurement because it's early stages, but it's absolutely crucial that exploration companies get this right from the very beginning. They're the ones who set the expectations from local communities. They're the ones who kind of start the business relationships that can be then carried on by whoever builds the mine one day, perhaps a different company who owns it. So, even though exploration companies might be in some ways the smallest player and the least resource player, it's actually vital they get procurement from Indigenous communities right from the very beginning. And again, that's why this checklist is meant to help those companies. So again, what we did with the checklist is we took procurement from Indigenous business and wider local procurement best practice, and we wanted to sort of, chuck it up into all the various components of local procurement. What we've heard from industry and various people who work in procurement and community relations, community development, is that yes, there is, general guidance on how to do local procurement, but when it comes to how to meaningfully implement those practices, there's not that many resources. And so this checklist really kind of aims to fill that gap. One of the ways we've done that is we took another Canadian model, which I think has a lot of value, which is the Canadian Mining Association of Canada. They have their Towards Sustainable Mining framework, and it's their industry sector standard. We were also very excited to work with to get feedback from the Mining Association of Canada and its Indigenous Affairs Committee on this. But one thing we kind of in some ways took from them is that we took this model of breaking up practices into sort of good, better, and best as a format. And so mining companies, and particularly lower capacity miner companies and exploration companies, often tell us, we see these requirements or these best practices, and we're too small to do it. Right? We're an exploration company, or we're tight on resources this year, or whatever that might be. And the advantage of breaking up the practices into kind of a level system like the TSM framework was it allows kind of a ladder approach, so that a company can take on, maybe this year, we're going to do 2 out of the 4 items on B, and then next year we're going to do the other 2 items in B, and then maybe 1 from A. And so it lays out a path to improve best practices in procurement, and it's not an all or none approach. I think is sort of a one thing that can scare off companies and kind of just put their hands up and say they don't want to get involved. And so on the screen right now is an example from the checklist, and I guess Caroline or somebody can put the link to the checklist for download in the chat, so everyone can do that. But when you take a look at the checklist, we broke up the categories of practices into 5 different areas. So one is Indigenous procurement strategy and management, which is all about how you manage manage the overall topic. Very similar to what would be in, say, the Global Reporting Initiative's management disclosures. The second category is preferential and conducive procurement procedures for Indigenous suppliers. And this is all about what kind of tweaks can you make to procurement processes to help them favor Indigenous suppliers. And you might think that procurement from local communities might be a more expensive process and it requires a lot of additional systems, but in many ways it really is just about things like paying ahead of time, or paying early for suppliers within a certain kilometer radius, for example. And that, in the end, that really doesn't cost much more or any more in some cases, but it makes a world of difference to local suppliers. And so this module is all about those procedures. 3 is sharing practical information and reporting. We think there's definitely a bit of a gap in the Canadian mining landscape in terms of how much practical information there is for local Indigenous communities on procurement. So, how procurement takes place, who to contact. And so we really wanted to make this checklist kind of push the bar in terms of how to help communities help themselves with procurement opportunities by giving them the practical information. And I should say, it's worth comparing to Australia, where for whatever reason, Australian mining companies or mining companies operating in Australia, perhaps I should say, tend to have better websites when it comes to procurement sections. So I think it's worth looking at some of those companies as a model as well. But there are, of course, some models in Canada, and I'll share a couple examples. The 4th topic is capacity building for existing and potential suppliers, which is all about the ways that you can support suppliers meaningfully through things like training and that kind of practice. And lastly, there's a section on supplier due diligence and anti-corruption, which is perhaps less relevant in Canada given the state of the economy and development. So things like child and forced labor are not a big problem, of course, in Canada. But it doesn't mean that it's not important to have effective due diligence systems in place. And for that matter, the Canadian government recently passed its Canadian anti-forced labor and child labor legislation, and it's vital that Canadian companies are able to demonstrate what they're doing to avoid issues in that regard. So again, going back to the checklist itself, in terms of an example, this is the Indigenous Procurement Strategy and Management section of the checklist, and you can see here are some tangible examples of how a company can kind of improve its practice. So the B level is sort of basically that there is a commitment to procurement from Indigenous communities. There are some ad hoc procedures to make local procurement happen. There's processes that are maybe being started to implement, but they're not sort of down, completely systematized. Whereas then, we get to A, which is to say where a standalone Indigenous procurement policy exists, or the supply chain policy, really codifies Indigenous procurement, how it works in the company. So again, this is sort of the idea of, maybe the company when it first started was this C and had nothing in place. And then it went sort of to general commitments, and then it moved on to a much more, robust system, right? Likewise, it's what is measured is managed, and so the A level includes the ability for a company to be able to provide a breakdown of the procurement spending that is going to Indigenous suppliers and non-Indigenous, for that matter. And then let's move on here. And then linked to that is there's an ability for procurement from Indigenous communities to be tracked by KPIs for the supply chain team. And that's something that we see as a big challenge, because unfortunately nowadays and across the industry, it is still common to see procurement staff from mining companies, or for any company that matter, who are completely motivated in terms of KPIs and remuneration based on faster, quicker, cheaper. And that obviously is the goal, is to keep costs down, but in the long run you might actually be undermining opportunities to lower costs by buying from local closer suppliers. So again, there's a need to adjust those KPIs. And then in terms of going into the AA and AAA, this is where a company can really kind of lead on Indigenous procurement. So this is where you're not just looking at the company's own practices. In this case, the AA level includes a working group that's being made by the mining company and Indigenous stakeholders and other supporting actors to be able to kind of meet regularly on finding new opportunities, tracking progress, finding pitfalls. If you meet on a regular basis, you can explain, well, whatever reason, maybe the price of the price of procurement has increased across the board, and the community committee can be a spot for people to raise concerns as to why that might be the case. Perhaps it's just a matter of short-term concerns, weather or high fuel prices, and that allows the company to have an open door policy, and they can kind of work out a solution to those problems, and instead of just sort of closing that door and not necessarily finding a solution. And then likewise, at the really exciting, AAA level, we've put where the company is going to, working with other companies and sort of pooling resources, finding opportunities to work together and support local indigenous suppliers. And again, I think this is where there's a really, the leading practice is because you can find mining companies who might be able to pool their resources and maybe get together and commit to supporting one supplier instead of fragmenting the market. So again, I think there's always a continuous improvement module here in the strategy and management section. And just a tangible example of that in practice, I just wanted to kind of show this. Rio Tinto, this is a past reporting example, and you can see here they've broken up their spending on procurement into a great level of detail. They've got northern indigenous suppliers, other northern, so non-indigenous, total northern, and then they have southern suppliers. So again, this really allows them to track their progress, identify opportunities to move, southern, in the case of Canada, southern Canada to northern, more local procurement, to northern, and then as well as to indigenous. So if you can actually track this track the spending, it'll drive performance, but also for that matter, the communities can hold the company to account with this data. So again, we really believe in transparency. And then likewise on the procurement procedures, I'm only going to go through two of the modules on the checklist side, and then I'll go to the community guidance. But again, just to show how the checklist works, when you look at this again is about what are the practices that companies can put in place to support suppliers. And so again, the B level is just basic. How do you register and supply a company? You reach out to the company, they provide you the information. That's great. It's as a start. Likewise, we have contact information available for suppliers, and then again in the procurement reporting, you're providing some level of detail on your spending. But then to go further in the A level, we've included where practical information is being provided at the site level on the company's website. So again, that's kind of what I alluded to before. It's ideal, of course, if suppliers can reach out to the company and get information, but it's all the much better if that information is available for everybody on the website. And that really, in particular, supports kind of less connected suppliers, shall we say. So you might be an indigenous supplier, or for that matter, a woman-owned business, who is not in that sort of tight-knit mining sector procurement club that might be in a particular region of the country. And so having public information certainly helps all suppliers access practical information on that. Likewise, there's a big focus on sustainability reporting in the A level, where you actually explain what you're doing and what your results. And then likewise, for the AA level, we've included where the IBAs, impact benefit agreements, are included. So again, trying to push the envelope on transparency, trying to support companies and indigenous communities to work together on refining processes. So again, another practical example on the company side is Agnico Eagle, which has, I will say, I think Agnico Eagle's Nunavut website is probably the gold standard in terms of practical information for suppliers. It just provides a very, very clear website of practical information, diagrams, flow charts. It shows you, if you're a supplier of all kinds, but a particularly Nunavut indigenous supplier, how to access procurement opportunities. And again, you might think that every supplier should know that, but every company has slightly different information. So it's really useful, and I really recommend people check out the Nunavut website for Agnico Eagle. So now moving on to the community guidance. What we wanted to do with the checklist was we've seen enough, in some ways we've seen enough of toolkits for companies that are kind of used by the leading companies, and perhaps in some ways not followed by the laggards in the industry. but we wanted to kind of break that cycle in some ways with this checklist and say, how do we actually support the other side of the equation, which in this case is Indigenous suppliers, to then to understand those procurement processes in the checklist, and then to, in some ways, constructively engage and in many ways hold companies to account for those practices. And so the community guidance is structured in a way which it takes all the elements of the checklist that I've just kind of laid out a few modules from, and then takes them and puts them into question format so that any supplier can then go up to that company and say, hey, we understand that it's good practice, for example, to have differential payment procedures for suppliers of different levels. And so we want to ask you, what is that process? What is your payment terms for the Indigenous community who might have an impact benefit agreement with your operation? What about non-Indigenous suppliers who maybe happen to be within 50 kilometers of the website, of the mine site? So again, we're trying to make this more of a living document with this, and the community guidance is meant to be used by Indigenous suppliers themselves, but also all the bodies that work around them. And so consultants who advise businesses, NGOs who might be doing some supplier development with community, education institutions, and various other actors. So again, it is meant to be used by the suppliers, but every actor who plays a role in that, we would also like to see using. And then likewise, so now I can show you the other side of an existing kind of topic, which I've already presented on, which is to say the Indigenous procurement strategy and management. So again, we've taken the checklist components and best practices, and we've kind of converted it into questions. So here, the original checklist best practices sort of saying how do you manage this? Where's the policy on Indigenous procurement? But this then gives the supplier the ability to say, hey, who is the person in the mining company who is responsible for this issue, right? Who can I talk to about your policy? It's all well and good to have a policy, but who can I, as a supplier, ask inside the company to say, well, are you fulfilling the policy? What's in the policy? Are you, what's the evidence that you're actually doing something towards that? And I think in trying to sort of make a governance tool almost in some way, can we help the supplier and the company co-govern by having the same set of information? Likewise, I mentioned this idea that some of the big suppliers, the engineering firms who build mines, they're the ones who do a lot of spending, but this is an area which is very much not on the radar of a lot of people. They don't realize that these engineering firms might be the ones doing all the work, even if the mining company's name is on the sign out front the constructed mine site. So this says to the company, on the checklist side, that you should be having procedures in place to, encourage or in some ways require these major suppliers to do their own procurement from Indigenous business. But here again is a question format where the supplier can then say, hey, I've noticed that Hatch or a big engineering firm, they're building this mine, but we haven't really been contacted by them about procurement opportunities, or we don't know who to contact. This then allows the supplier to ask the mining company, what actions have you taken to encourage Hatch to buy from us? What procedures are in place? And if there aren't any procedures, what has the company considered adding in a bid submission criteria where Hatch or another format has to put in place some kind of criteria that they will buy from local businesses in order to get the contract in the first place from the big mining company. So again, this takes a best practice that we've included in the checklist, but then it kind of gives the question for the Indigenous supplier to ask the mining company to hold them to account for that matter. Again, similarly in the preferential and conducive procurement procedures, we've got the idea of set-aside contracts. It's quite common in IBAs to have a particular set of work packages set aside so that Indigenous suppliers can essentially get those contracts unless there is simply no ability at the local level to do so. We ask, which are those contracts? Which work packages are set aside for us to bid on, and that way we can prepare ourselves for that. And then likewise, I've already alluded to the early and flexible payment procedures, and unbundling contracts is another example where, we could take a big work package that might be too big for any small local supplier, and particularly a early stage ECDEV corporation or another supplier who might not be big enough yet to handle a massive package of work, but can say, hey, maybe if we break up this package of work into smaller chunks, we can get a piece of that and gradually grow our business and our capacity to work on larger contracts down the road. So this again asks the company, well, what is the process for unbundling procedures for contracts, and can we get opportunity for that as well? And then likewise, making public announcements and advertisements. Can you please confirm to us how you advertise procurement opportunities for Indigenous suppliers? And they'll do one more, and then I think we can definitely open up for Q&A and discussion. The last module I'll talk about is capacity building for existing and potential suppliers. And again, what we're asking here is, if a mining company wants to build the capacity for suppliers, it has to start somewhere in terms of assessment of those suppliers. And this asks, what kind of audits or assessments does your company offer to us as a supplier, for us to be able to kind of assess where we are on that development trajectory, and can we be audited, for example. And then likewise, the economic capabilities assessments is a similar idea, but at a larger scale. What has the company done to assess the entire local area around the mining company, to assess what suppliers are available, what suppliers would be competitive if they had a little bit of support. And so again, we take what should be a best practice across the entire sector in terms of measuring twice and cutting once and finding the right opportunities, and we turn it into a question which the ECDEV corporation or another stakeholder can ask. And then likewise, lastly, what trainings does the mining company provide, and how can we get involved in those? When is the upcoming training taking place? So that's just another example. So just lastly, I'll just show another example. This is actually from Australia. This is a Canadian checklist, but certainly many of the practices in Australia are very similar for best practice from Indigenous procurement. And so we took this example of BHP and their business training program in the Pilbara. So I do want to leave time for questions. I can go through some of the checklists and the community guidance to give you a flavor of it. Of course, again, there's 5 wider topics, but that kind of gives you how this checklist works. What are the questions that suppliers can ask the mining company, and how can ultimately both sides work together in a constructive way to find opportunities, to build the capacity of Indigenous suppliers to seize those opportunities, and for everybody to work together to progress economic development. I'll leave it there for now.
Awesome. Maybe while folks are formulating the questions in their head, just some broader level best practices. Yes, Jeff, you nailed it. I was down under the Mirrabite. And interestingly, one of the BHP's best practices is the fact that they have established, that's about 20 years old, and I sit on it now as the Canadian, the Forum for Corporate Responsibility. So they make room for us, and it's made up of some global thought leaders around sustainability issues, including Indigenous issues, that works directly with the executive and reports in to Mike, the CEO, a couple times a year on sustainability issues, because it's really important for mining companies or any company working in the territories of communities to hear directly at all levels, from the frontline staff who are working with communities to the executives who are managing the corporation. And even a level above that, and you probably know where I'm going with this, Jeff, because you know how passionate I am about directors, Indigenous directors on boards, and ensuring that the board of directors are the ones that direct the CEO and the strategy, and keeping them accountable to the strategy and managing risk, et cetera. And having bad relationships with Indigenous nations is a big risk. So doing full circle here again around making sure that we've got robust supply chains of Indigenous suppliers, both the development corporations and their partners and the entrepreneurs, is really important. One way of getting ahead of that risk by having strong relationships with communities. So for companies that don't have an Indigenous director, it's the same thing, you know, making sure that you got strong gender diversity representation on your boards. Don't tell me that you can't find Indigenous directors because you're not doing the work. So make sure that from a holistic point of view, from your corporation or in your supply chain, that to Jeff's point around on the checklist is driving change requires change, and driving change requires you to be a little uncomfortable. And that's everybody in the supply chain, making sure that folks that are, or companies that are the tier ones that Jeff explained, that are in your supply chain are incentivized as well to hit the targets that you're also trying to achieve. It's not, I always ask a company, like, why do you feel the responsibility to do everything? There's a bunch of companies in your supply chain that can also help support stronger relationships, stronger supply chains, stronger socioeconomic outcomes as a result of doing good work with Indigenous nations. So just a few little more lobs into the pool here, Jeff. But I understand that the table's open now. I don't know. I'll stop there. I can keep going, but that's probably not a good idea.
Oh, very helpful.
Great. Well, thanks, JP. That is really helpful. We do have a few questions in the chat, so maybe I'll read these out, and then also, if anyone would like to raise their hand, we can also unmute you if you'd prefer to speak rather than to put your question in the chat or the Q&A. So we'll monitor that as well. The first question that we have here is just about would anybody just around industry collaboration. So this person would be interested to hear how and if you collaborate with industry to develop the checklist. So for example, Mining Association of Canada, PDAC, or any other bodies.
Great. No, happy to cover that one. No, we were really grateful for the input of MAC in particular. So Tara Shea from the she's I guess I think her title is Indigenous Affairs Manager, but they have the MAC has a committee of the company members who basically meet regularly on these issues. And this checklist the draft checklist was presented to them, and they provided feedback in written format as well. So very grateful. Again, these, you know, one of the premises of the checklist is that across Canada, someone's already doing this well. We know that there's one mining company doing a great job on every topic in this checklist. One mining company is probably doing the best at, and we really wanted to sort of harvest and source those examples to make this checklist. We didn't want to push for the industry to do something they weren't already doing. We wanted to say, look, here's the leading company doing this, follow them, for example. And so that's sort of how it's structured. And so we were able to get feedback from industry on what are those best practices, what should be that ladder, what should be an A, what should be a B level. And I think that's again going back to Mac's approach, is that they actually update their TSM levels every few years, and I think the same thing could be happening here. Maybe the industry in Canada gets to a level where it's so good at this issue that we actually start moving some of the things that are currently in AA into A, and that would be the best case scenario. We actually see the industry change so much that we actually get to continuous improvement for the entire sector. So again, super grateful for Mac's input. I don't know, JP, I'm sure you've worked with Mac many times before.
Yeah, I mean, 100%. And being the question around PDAC, being around those rooms, being around the leaders, both Indigenous and non, it's really important to understanding the let's say cutting edge, maybe bleeding edge issues. For sure, as Jeff mentioned, there's a plethora of opportunities to learn from corporations that are doing it right, and as well the ones that have made mistakes. And then on the other side of it too, and why this relationship with Mokwete, my firm, and Jeff's EWB is the fact that, we bring in a strong, test it with nations. And you can say it's one thing to put something down on paper, but then to go to a strong Indigenous nation like a Mikisew group of companies, go, does this make sense? Because you're leaders in this space. And there are a number of First Nation ECDEVs across, and Inuit corporations and Métis corporations that are doing good work with the mining sector. and also explaining to us where things have fallen off the rails. So understanding from both inputs is really important.
Great, thank you. We've got one, Mark Dean, who has raised their hand, so I'm going to just unmute you.
Perfect, thank you. Yeah, good afternoon. First off, I just wanted to, congratulate the folks here who put this checklist together. It's a great program, and we walked through this. I'm with Barrick Gold, and we walked through this program at Hemlo, our Canadian site, this month, and it was an eye opener for us, just because it was got to see a snapshot of where we are, and we discovered that of course there was a lot of opportunities, and so we're now creating an action plan to address some of those. But I guess my question. Are you seeing a lot of companies, focusing on external verification once they've kind of, identified their opportunities and addressed them? And are companies going out and seeking an external party to come in and really have a look at what the company has done?
Go ahead, JP. I'll leave it to you.
Well, there's two, both on the front end, and then I'm sure Jeff will weigh on the sustainability, the measurements. On the front end, we're seeing companies, of course, CCIB, when I was there, it was PAR, but now it's PEER to help frameworks. And of course, that gets measured every 3 years. And then a lot of companies now are doing reconciliation action plans as well, to help ground their strategies and thinking in how their business functions intersect with community. So absolutely on the front end, and the old companies are actually relying on organizations like Mokotes, and there's some really great Indigenous consulting firms out there that'll come in and evaluate how the company is doing on the RAP. So you can look at, say, LPG's got a really fantastic RAP, and they're evaluating their numbers every year, and they're being verified, and firms are helping them along with that as an example. I don't know, Jeff, I'm sure you've got more color here.
Yeah, no, I'll cover the back end. So, I mean, in terms of external assurance and all these practices, I would say that we are seeing a bit more of that. I mean, a lot of the quickly on for those who don't know, TSM, you do have to get assured. I believe it's every 3 years if you use the TSM framework. But to be honest, one thing that's a bit lacking right now in the TSM framework is actually local procurement really isn't included in a serious way. So again, we hope this checklist will help that. But overall, we would say, yes, there is a movement towards companies getting external assurance on their sustainability reporting, on some of their practices. There's been definitely a tightening, shall we say? I mean, I think it has to do a lot to do with the new due diligence legislation, a number of sort of legislation, ESG rating criteria, lots of things like that are actually pushing companies to say, look, no, we actually do this and we need to do this. And it should also be noted that there is sort of some early days movement towards greenwashing legislation right now as well. It's focused, yes, right now on climate disclosure, but again, it's all going to come the same way. Well, eventually, companies will have to be able to demonstrate that their claims they're making in sustainability reporting, and in this case, what they're doing on Indigenous procurement, they could verify. So I think it's a positive development overall for sure. Great question. Thanks, Mark.
Great, thank you. Great. So we've got a few questions in the Q&A. The first question is from David, and it is, how applicable do you see the checklist for industry and other natural resources sectors such as energy, i.e. oil and gas, forestry, and electricity?
Maybe I'll jump in. Or do you want to go first, Jeff?
No, go ahead,
you sure?
Go, Jim. Yeah, go ahead.
Okay, thanks. This is right in my wheelhouse as a forester. Yeah. As a guy that sits on Suncor's board, and I sit on mining boards, very applicable. A lot of these lessons that you learn here. The fact is that when anything, the duty to consult, FPIC, UNDRIP, the clarity around this is still percolating. We're still trying to figure out what this means in this country. And so understanding the components and kind of parsing out things like procurement, because whenever you touch down in any part of this country, you're in somebody's traditional territory. And many of the community's businesses, quite frankly, are interchangeable between various sectors as well. When you look at that list, that with the Rio Tinto list, I believe, Jeff, on the site there against all the services, Many of those services are applicable right across all those sectors, as well as the energy sector, where nations now are the third largest asset holder in clean energy, renewable energy projects. So certainly, again, I love this line, the path to net zero runs through the indigenous territories. So keeping that in mind around certainty, around inclusivity, D&I, all those things, ESG. So I know I'm getting off topic a little bit on the applicability of this checklist across, but yes, unequivocally, in my opinion, there's a lot of great lessons to learn that can be applied across all sectors. Jeff, if you disagree.
Yeah, I mean, no, 100% agreed. And I mean, I would go, we've been doing this now for over a decade, and we make these sort of tools in the mining sector, almost everything in them is completely applicable for every other sector. I mean, procurement is procurement. Build a supplier is a supplier when it comes to the practices, right? So yes, the products are different and the scale might be different, and that obviously changes things in terms of the opportunities. But ultimately, you do the right consultations, whether you're a forester or a mining company. What we find is that in order to sort of motivate change in the sector, you have to herd cats. I mean, that's what we have to work with different stakeholders. And for example, in this case, if we were to make a checklist, we were able to make this checklist with the support of MAC. Okay, great. If we were to make sort of a general procurement checklist, I suppose, and we were trying to get feedback from MAC and from CAP and from sort of all the different organizations, the more cats, the more cooks, it starts to get a little more complicated. So I think that's sort of, it's sort of a necessity that it becomes a single sector that is focused on in the material, in the case studies and examples, which makes sense because you want to be able to show examples and demonstrate that. But I think the practices, generally speaking, are very applicable. So by all means, we would love for an oil and gas company or a forestry company to just take this and take some lessons.
Yeah, and I wouldn't mind supplementing a little bit on one of the questions that I read around scale. And Jeff, you were just talking a little bit about scale, and there are communities that have limited sophistication and resources to participate in the mining sector. That doesn't mean you ignore them. You've got to be able to start where they're at, and you have to build that relationship to understand what their aspirations are. And partnerships are not a bad thing for Indigenous nations. If we look at, a story I know really well with Fort McKay, Chief Jim Boucher, chief 30 plus years, he's retired as a chief now, started off with a janitorial contract. And now you look at, it was 40 years ago. So, you've got to start where the communities are at. The best time to plant a tree, I'm a forester, is 100 years ago. The next best time is today. So you got to put the effort in. And what are some of the function or the things that you can be doing in the near term is actually bringing in capacity of other successful entrepreneurs to support that community development, or creating partnerships with them and other companies that have similar values to help mentor, that have the balance sheets, have the know-how. Joint ventures are not a bad thing, and a lot of communities use joint ventures to actually enter into the supply chains in a big way. It's actually building the capacity and generate revenue generation for those communities so that they can grow. Yes, there's the negative side of this. Some communities are just taking a percentage, and that's not all bad in my opinion either, because the community can use those to augment the limited funding that they get from government. So, and then just one other little point on the other question about how do you ladder these skills. If you start bringing in and understanding community needs and where their aspirations are, and actually figure out that you can develop these assets and these companies to jump into other sectors once a mine closure happens and remediation happens. There are companies in the oil sands now that are thinking already of divesting divesting some of their resources and time to investing in other parts and sectors across the country. Takes time. Business doesn't happen overnight, so you've got to invest in the capacity and evolution of the Indigenous community to participate in business. And mining sectors are just a great opportunity to be the catalyst to change.
Thanks, JP. That's great. So I think that answers a few of the questions in the chat around the risk of dependency solely on mining companies, and also around capacity. We've got one more there. Are you aware of any opportunities that facilitate knowledge and learning exchange between Indigenous businesses involved in procurement? So any opportunities or resources?
Call Tabitha Bowles' team,
Yeah.
CCIB. I mean, they're extraordinary. They're doing great work. They're, again, The process isn't perfect. We're still trying to figure out. You've seen, you know, I don't sugarcoat stuff. You've seen some of the negative press on Indigenous procurement, federal spend, etc. But this is just the start of this journey. Tabitha's team on best practices, on networks, on supporting Indigenous communities and businesses to develop their businesses. They're doing great work, so I highly recommend engaging the CCIB. They have a lot of tools, research. That's where Jeff and I got to meet, and I like to think we made some positive impact in the world, Jeff. So I think that would be a wonderful place to start, and as well as the First Nation Major Projects Coalition, another great organization, and a lot of great support from NRCan. That relationship has been strong over the last number of years. Again, you can see the coalitions of communities, businesses, governments on how infrastructure is going to help facilitate economic reconciliation as well as Canada's competitiveness globally. I don't have much more time, but economic reconciliation needs to be viewed as our competitive edge. When we get good at these relationships, we unleash the human capital. We unleash we strengthen and create a more robust supply chain, and as well as that relationship to get through environmental and regulatory processes with communities. Those are some big. I like to look at them as opportunities. So we've got to invest the time. I know, Jeff. Sorry, that was a lot.
No, why would I try to take that from you? I mean, yeah, of course, the CCIB is a great network. The other one I would add on that is just the events. I mean, I was in this OECD conference in Sudbury 2 weeks ago, and I mean, it's just amazing. These events bring everybody together, share practice. I think the PDAC convention in Toronto, the Indigenous program is fantastic. I mean, to be honest, the sustainability program it is great too, but the Indigenous program, every time I go, it's standing room only. There's so many people from both the industry side as well as the supplier side. They're in the room together. They're sharing best practices. So I really recommend it. It's worth the investment to attend that to meet fellow travelers on this journey. So
well said.
Great. Well, we are coming up to time, and so we probably, I don't see any more questions in the chat or any more hands raised. So I think we've made perfect timing. We'll end this with Melanie to have some closing remarks. But you see here, we also have Jeff's email, and you can get in touch if you have further questions, or of course, the link has been shared in the chat for the Procurement Less and the community guidance as well.
Thank you, Carolyn, and thank you, Jeff. JP, it's a really great review of the procurement checklist and a great conversation with a good Q&A session. And again, thanks to everyone for joining us for this webinar on the local procurement checklist to support Indigenous procurement in mining. If you have any outstanding questions, we're certainly really happy to engage on this, and you can reach us via the minescanada.ca website. And also just a reminder, in the coming weeks, this webinar is going to be available on the minescanada.ca website and also shared amongst your networks. And in the meantime, I invite you to take a look at the checklist. You can download a copy from the website. If you want a hard copy, just let us know. We're happy to mail them out too. Alors, dans les semaines à venir, ce webinaire sera disponible sur le site minescanada.ca et partagé dans vos réseaux. En attendant, je vous invite à consulter la liste de vérification sur le site minescanada.ca. Alors, thank you. Merci. Really look forward to having more conversations in this realm. So have a wonderful rest of your day. Thank you.
Thank you, Miigwech.
yes, thank you.